I'm Alicia, and today we're going to talk about how to use your school projects for environmental activism. Because, you're in school already. They've got you doing school stuff, so why not use it to further some issues that you care about? We're going to look at this video and figure out how to do just that. So what we'll be covering, we're breaking this video up into two parts: elementary, middle, and high school, kind of like the first part of school that people can go through, and then we're going to have a section on college and post-grad. Now, these are split up into these two categories, but I want to just say at the beginning that no matter what education level you're at, you can learn something from any part of this video. If you are an elementary or middle school student, you might see something in the college and post-grad section that really inspires you to do a project. If you're a college or post-grad student, you might see something in the elementary, middle, and high school section that really speaks to you and inspires you to do something. So don't discount any of the video just because it's not your exact grade level, but if you want kind of a specific thing honing in on where you're at, feel free to check out the sections of the video that are about sort of the level of education that you're at. So yeah, let's get started. So elementary, middle, and high school. This is going to be our first section. And what we're really saying here is that this is where the classes are divided by subject. So you've got like your math, your English, things like that. In college, it's a little more specific and there's lots of different kinds of options. But in elementary, middle, and high school, you've kind of got your usual suspects in terms of classes that you can do. So we'll be looking at some project ideas that kind of fit with the theme of those basic classes. So for something like math, there's all kinds of possibilities. For a type of project that's a little more on the basic side, a little simpler, you could write your own environmental themed word problems. I've got this example right here. It says a small town uses 240 megawatt hours of electricity per year, which it currently gets from a coal-fired power plant. It wants to switch to entirely renewable energy. If the town only has funds for 6 wind turbines, which each produce 3 megawatt hours per year, how many megawatt hours will the town need to stop using in order to be fully wind powered? So right now we've got sort of this like little multiplication problem, this little algebra problem, but it's using the example of a town that wants to switch to renewable energy. And this can kind of get you thinking about, what are the types of math that a place has to do a renewable transition. This is the kind of stuff that people use all the time. For a more advanced math project that goes into environmental themes, I would highly suggest, right here on the screen, we have the US Climate Vulnerability Index, which is this really cool resource full of statistics that goes down to the county level of things like, how many places are going to have like extreme weather events due to climate change, or that already have infrastructure that isn't so good, so that if a storm comes in or if a drought comes in, it's going to be worse. And this is a source of a lot of data. So if you were learning about statistics, if you're learning about like mean, median, mode, variance, and how that impacts sort of like the probability that maybe something will happen or how many people might be at risk, you can start applying those topics to the data in the Climate Vulnerability Index as a type of project. There are lots of data sources like this online. I will be linking all the sources that I sort of like use as examples in this video. I will be linking them in the YouTube video description, so feel free to check them out and use them for a project that you're going to do. For science, this is probably the one that maybe feels like the most obvious one, because climate change and environmental issues are usually posed as a science question. But again, there's lots of things to do here. For something more basic, you could present to the class about a biome. That's kind of a project that sometimes people do already. You can say why it's important, but you can also research the types of threats it faces. So for a marine biome, maybe like one near the shore, you might talk about like overfishing or pollution from litter that comes up onto the beaches. Or if you're talking about grasslands, you can talk about when it's converted to agriculture, these big monocrops, what happens to all the species that used to live on the grassland? How do they cope? For something more advanced, again, we have some like nice data sources here. This one is coming from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it's the change in average precipitation, so how much it's raining, how much it's snowing, etc. And this is something that is going to affect all the plants that grow, whether it's crops for feeding people or whether it's kind of like the rainforests and forests that we've already got going on. So if you were to do maybe like a science fair project that was, let's take these couple plants and let's have all of their conditions be the same, but let's only give them the amount of precipitation that is projected under this much global warming, this much. You could kind of see how is the health of these plants changing based on different ways that the climate could go in the future. For reading and writing, or for English classes, there's a lot you can do here as well. This is how we're communicating to people about the climate crisis and, why the planet is worth saving. For something more basic, something more simple, you could write a poem about being in a natural or artificial environment. What does it feel like when you're out in the park? Or what does it feel like when you're, sitting there at the bus stop watching all the cars and buses go by? What do you think about like your connection to the natural world and things like that? Also, I put the asterisk there. Poems can be basic, but they don't have to be. They vary wildly. A poem could be, bringing in all sorts of thoughts and ideas, or it can just be something that you write to get your feelings out. So it really depends on what you put into it. So do all of these projects. For something more advanced, you could do an essay analyzing the concept of wilderness in writing. Because wilderness is kind of a weird concept, right? It's this idea of like, nature is only nature if humans don't touch it. Which is kind of made up, right? Like, that's, who came up with that idea? Who popularized it? Why did it take such a hold in, books like Walden that are commonly read? What does it mean? Are there alternatives to this idea? Things like that. That could be something you analyze and see what effect that it's had on people throughout the ages. For history, environmental history is a thread of history, Not all the environmental activism has been done, right here and now today. There's a long history of it, and we can look back and see what worked and what didn't. For something more basic, you could pick an event in environmental history around the world. Down there we've got two examples. We've got the first Earth Day, and then we've got this book called The Greenbelt Movement by Wangari Maathai, who is a very prominent environmental activist who did a lot of tree planting in kind of like desert areas, who really helped to kind of like combat like monoculture agriculture and the destruction that it was having on her homeland. And then for something more advanced, you could look at sort of the theme of environmental destruction being a strategy in war on the battlefield. The first picture there is of all these skulls of buffalo which were killed as colonial powers came in and took over more and more of North America. So this was taking out a keystone species as a way of getting more power over the native people who are already there, which can be really thought of as a strategy of war that's focused on destroying the environment. Then to the right of that, we have Agent Orange coming over in the Vietnam War, where the US is spraying this pesticide to take away all the leaves from the trees and be able to see the people that it's fighting better in order to target them with bullets and bombs. So in both of these examples, you have destruction of the natural environment as a way to wage war against some people. So you could analyze how that's been used through history and the destructive effects that it has had. Then for the arts, for something more basic, you could draw some portraits of endangered animals. There are a multitude of scholarship contests that have this as their kind of prompts. They'll tell you, hey, could you make some art about the theme of like clean water or animal rights or things like that. If you look them up, there are lots of scholarships that you can apply to where you kind of like submit your art to a contest, and that's kind of like a good way to maybe get some scholarship money and sort of like use your art to promote an important topic like this. For something more advanced, you could create a play about resistance to resource extraction. There are lots of stories around the world of people really banding together to make sure that some type of environmental destruction doesn't happen to their homeland. So this picture is from India, and it's people opposing a mining operation that was going to pollute their main source of water, which the movement has been pretty successful so far. So if you were going to create a play about that, you would have to research, this act of resistance and say, like, who were the groups trying to do the resource extraction? What were their motivations? And for the group of resistors, did some of them want to give up at some time? What did they use to like push through? And if you were able to kind of like make it a narrative, then that would be a good way to sort of study and popularize these stories of resistance. And just for some general tips and ideas that can kind of apply to a lot of these different projects, if you're having trouble thinking of a topic to use, you can use the most interesting animal, plant, or place as kind of like a starting point to start researching that, see if there's anything that catches your eye, go from there. You can also use the databases of your school's library for research. Those are very helpful and can help you kind of like get out of the rut that sometimes Google can stick you in with, not really knowing, is this like a trustable source or not? The databases are usually better with that. You could interview an expert on the subject, or even better, multiple different types of experts. See what they say. Are they agreeing with each other? Do they have different perspectives on the same topic? That'll tell you a lot about your topic. And then for kind of like your final products, you don't have to do just one. You could do, for example, an essay and a series of sketches about the same topic and see how it's different to address it in writing versus a drawing. So that's all for the elementary, middle, and high school section. And now we will move on to the college and post-grad section. So this should get interesting because this is where projects can be more specific and self-directed. They're not in this sort of like math, science, reading and writing, art, super specific categories. They can be more what you intend them to be. You can get a little complicated with them. So this section is going to be a little bit differently laid out, where, because I don't know, what classes you're taking exactly, but there's some things that can apply to lots of different subjects. So we're going to do the tips and ideas first, and then we're going to elaborate on each of them and try to give some inspiration. So for the tips, we could take a well-established, unquestioned tool, concept, or assumption in your field and question it through an environmental lens. This can always be interesting because, if something's unquestioned, then you can be the first to sort of break into it and say, well, what is this actually doing? And you can really uncover some very deep things about your subject by questioning what nobody questions. Another idea is to partner with an organization, especially one without much access to resources, and do a project that enhances their work. If you're in a college and university, you usually have access to this, sort of free time, this funding that maybe other people don't have. If you can lend that to them, it can make that group stronger. You can expand on your own previous research. This is kind of nice because sometimes a quarter or a semester can give you a good start on something, but it's not enough to really go in depth on the issue that you just learned so much about. You don't want to abandon it right there. You want to keep going with it, maybe from a different angle. And then finally, you can do a project that forces you out of the normal academic spaces. So for the first idea, which is taking that well-established, unquestioned tool and questioning it, we've got some examples. One big one is in economics, the concept of future discounting. So that would be where basically if you are making an investment in something, or you're seeing like what kind of benefits is this decision going to have, and you're kind of counting it in terms of money. The future discounting is the idea that if something is a benefit in the future, like maybe 50 years in the future, you count it less than the same benefit if you were getting it today. And that seems to make sense, sort of, because maybe you don't know if you're actually going to get that benefit in 50 years. So can you really count on it as much? Maybe not, so maybe it should be worth less. But when you put this in practice, it tends to make a lot of environmental decisions seem like not as worth it, because it's going to benefit people who are way in the future, or it's going to protect people in the future from harm. And so you're essentially saying that matters less than benefits you get now from maybe oil drilling or something, when down the line that could cause infrastructure destruction because of higher temperatures or something like that. So there's actually a lot of literature out there that is kind of questioning this previously unquestioned tool of future discounting through an environmental lens. So that's something you can look at to get kind of inspiration on this type of idea. But future discounting isn't the only place where you could use this tip. Other ideas, just kind of thinking of them, you could question the idea of borders. Almost every country out there is using borders, these sort of lines that we draw to delineate, okay, this is where these laws are going to apply, and this is where these laws are going to apply, and we're going to make sure that only certain things or people cross those lines. But a lot of things that we're dealing with in the environmental sphere, rainfall or rivers or carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, they're not stopping at borders. To them, borders are made up. So how can you have a law in one place that is maybe really strict with pollution, and another place where the laws are really relaxed about pollution? The sort of benefits of a law in one place aren't going to just like disappear once they get to the border or vice versa. So we can kind of question borders as like, do they work for environmental issues? Another thing that you could question is experiments done under lab conditions or through computer models. This can be the case with predictions of weather, especially like far out into the future. It can be for models of like plant and animal populations, because sometimes what happens, there's nothing wrong with using lab conditions or computer models to study something, but if you have a paper that is, citing a study that only did it through a computer model, that only did the study through the computer model, that only did the study through the computer model, and so on, well, eventually you start to think like, when's the last time that you based your conclusions in the reality that's happening on the ground? And so things like that can be a subject of investigation, because if you base something off the like ideal conditions in your computer model, that might not actually be helpful for the person who is taking your scientific discoveries and trying to put them into practice. For tip 2, this is partnering with an organization with fewer resources. One idea for this is, there's a lot of grassroots organizations out there, volunteer organizations that are doing a lot of work, but they don't really keep track of it so much. They don't quantify it so much, and so it's hard for them to say, oh, this is what worked, this is what didn't. So you can help them out with that. For example, right here, we have a picture of some people taking out invasive species from a forest. But they might not know, oh, last year did we take out more invasive species than this year? Or where is the place where we took out the most of them and where that was most helpful? But this tool over here, it says QGIS. GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems, and this is a tool that's pretty cool. It's basically any type of data set that has XY coordinates as part of the data. You can use GIS to plot them on a map. So for this example, if we said, let's have the map of this area of the forest where these volunteers are working and taking out the invasive species. And let's have them say, oh, at point A, we took out 20 of them. And at point B, we took out 10 of them. And at point C, we took out 25 of them, or something like that. And then you could put that into the GIS, into the Geographic Information System, and then you would have a searchable map that says, you could say, for this area, show the sites where we took out the most. Or, if you put the data in, where the concentration of the invasive species was highest during the summer months for, the last decade or something like that. And then you can start to build up a lot of information just based on what these people are doing as volunteers. So by using this tool, you could help them be more evidence-based in their practice by starting up this project for them. And then we've got tip 3, expanding on your own previous research. So sometimes it happens where, maybe you've followed one of these tips already and you've just done a really cool project on heavy metals in urban garden soil, and you've done a lot of looking at academic papers and reports and things like that, and you've found that heavy metals in urban garden soil is a problem and that it might be contaminating the food. Okay, that's great to know, that's pretty concerning. You want to make sure that's not the case. But all you've done so far is read a lot of academic articles. But what happens now to the people who haven't read those articles and are actually using the urban gardens? So maybe your next project could be going to the local urban gardens saying, hey, I just found this research. Maybe we can test your soil and we can test some remediation techniques. How can we get these heavy metals out? And then you could write up your findings on how it was to actually work with these groups. So in that way, you can expand on your previous research and take it kind of to the next level, and not just stop when the class stops. And then finally, this is one of my favorite tips. Do a project that forces you out of the normal academic spaces. You know, college, university, it can tend to kind of like narrow your focus a bit. You can be like, you know, oh, if I just like read all the articles and take all the lectures and things like that, then I can know everything there is to know about the subject. But there's so much more than just what gets written down. And sometimes you need to kind of like ground yourself back in the world as it is and with the people who are actually experiencing these issues. So for example, you know, we're in the university all the time, but do we think about the people who keep the university running, like the custodians? So when I was talking to custodians at my old university, I found that a lot of them had super long commutes. They were driving or taking public transportation, 2-3 hours just to get to the school to be able to clean it. And they had such early working hours that they were having to wake up at like 1 or 2 in the morning to get to the campus at like 4 or 5 in the morning to start their day. And so, if we're thinking about this environmentally, that is a lot of commute time. That's a lot of pollution that is, kind of avoidable, right? If they just lived near their workplace, all that wouldn't be happening. But what was happening is they were being priced out of the area near the school because it was such high demand for students. So they were getting priced out because they have, their low wages. They're having to live very far away from the city. And so, if you were to say, interview a bunch of those custodians and say, what is your average or median commute time? Are you doing it with public transportation? Are you doing it with a car? Are you carpooling? You could probably figure out, how much extra emissions are coming from the fact that low wage earning workers are being priced out of places near their workplace. You could figure out the carbon cost of that kind of like economic policy, which would be really interesting, especially considering that, most people don't even think about the custodians. And that's all. Thank you so much for watching. These are just some, very these are ideas meant to get you thinking. They're not by any means an exhaustive list of the types of projects that you could do, but I hope this video helped you think about, for your experience in school, you get to make it what you want it to be. And, even if you're there just because you have to be for like early school or for a degree, you can make it work for you, you can make it work for the planet, and you can try to use it to like reach out and figure out about the world that you're in. So discuss this video with your class, share it to somebody you know who's a student, and if you do any of these ideas or something like them, please comment below and we can all get inspired by it. Thank you so much. See you next time.